From today, we have decided to live in this house. You're in the way, so I'd like to divorce you, but I guess you can stay as a maid if you must. Suddenly, my husband brought home his mistress and their 3 children. I was so shocked by his sudden and selfish declaration that I was at a loss for words and could not close my gaping mouth. The mistress, who seemed at least 10 years younger than me with her flashy hairdo, mocked. "Is it really okay to say that?" as she giggled. Facing the mistress, my husband boasted, "She's like a slave who can't defy me." He then put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Well, from now on, please do your best as a maid." The mistress also sneered, "Sorry about this," as she looked at me with a grin. "If he wants the house, he can have it. I no longer have any reason to endure this. No, I will divorce and leave this house, so please do as you like with it." I faced my husband and his mistress directly and spoke clearly. My husband, who had assumed I was dependent on him, was dumbfounded by my easy agreement to the divorce. The idea that I depended on my husband is ridiculous. Rather, letting go of my husband means I can finally be free. Afterwards, my husband, having driven me out, started living in the house with his mistress. However, that was just the beginning of his hell. I am Michelle. I have a family of 3, including my husband and our son. I was busy working as a high school teacher before I married. I met my husband at a drinking party hosted by a friend. He took a liking to me at first sight and persistently asked for my contact information. I had just broken up with my boyfriend and wasn't interested in dating anyone, especially since he wasn't my type, so I brushed him off. However, due to my husband's persistence, our mutual friends found it amusing and encouraged me to give him a chance. Reluctantly, I exchanged contact details with him, and after his relentless pursuit, we started dating. My husband was very attentive and planned our dates according to my preferences, always putting me first. Initially, I was hesitant, but gradually, I was drawn to him, and we started dating. 6 months into our relationship, he proposed. I thought it was too soon for marriage, but I decided to go ahead, thinking, "He's so kind, it must be okay." After getting married, I soon found out I was pregnant. My husband wanted me to quit my job and take care of the house, so I resigned from my long-standing teaching position. Though I loved my job, I had no regrets, considering my love for my husband and our upcoming child. My parents lived a plane ride away from our current house, and I was worried about managing household chores and childcare after giving birth. However, my husband insisted on helping and persuaded me to stay home for the birth. After our son was safely born, we began the adventure of parenting. Returning home after a week in the hospital, filled with both excitement and anxiety about our new life as a family of 3, I was greeted by an unbelievable sight. Clothes were strewn everywhere, and leftover containers from food boxes and fast food wrappings covered the table. In the kitchen sink, dishes and cups from the past week lay untouched, and the laundry area was piled high with dirty clothes. The room I had meticulously cleaned before my hospital stay was unrecognizable, as if it had been ransacked. Standing still with my son in my arms, my husband emerged from the back room and greeted me with a smile. "Welcome back. You've had a week to rest, so get ready to work hard." I stared at him, thinking it was a joke, but he tilted his head with a smile, puzzled. What a situation. I was overwhelmed. Before giving birth, I had quit my job to take care of all the household chores since my husband was busy with his work. I had assumed that during my absence, he would naturally take care of the housework. If it had been a child left alone, I might understand, but my husband is a grown adult. Faced with my husband who showed no signs of remorse, I wondered where even to begin. Carefully choosing my words, I reasoned with him. I've only been out of the hospital for a week, I'm still not back to full strength. And I didn't get much rest because I was taking care of the baby. It's going to be tough with the baby, and you said you'd help. That's why I didn't go back to my parents' house. Despite my plea, my husband replied, I'm working, and the household chores are your job, right? Then he added, well, take care. I guess I'll look after the kid, and sat down on the sofa to turn on the TV. I was shocked by his selfish reasoning and was speechless. Realizing I needed to clean up the messy house to take care of my son, I quickly started cleaning while still in pain from the delivery. When my son started crying, I hoped my husband would help soothe him. But instead, he just called out, he's crying, which is not the same as taking care of him. I was getting increasingly irritated from exhaustion, but arguing seemed a waste of time. Trying to suppress my frustration, I showed my husband how to change a diaper. But he never took the initiative to do it himself. Ultimately, I managed to clean the house while carrying my crying son on my back. Meanwhile, my husband slept on the sofa, and when he finally woke up in the late afternoon, his first words were, "What's for dinner?" That day, too exhausted to cook, I asked if we could buy some ready-made meals from the supermarket. Of course, I had to walk there myself, carrying my son. Walking to the supermarket, I was filled with a sense of misery, wondering why I was going through this after just having worked hard to give birth. Returning home from the hospital to this treatment was disheartening. Given my husband's attitude, I couldn't expect any support from him in the future. I was already regretting my marriage. Despite being on paternity leave for a week, my husband spent his nights up late playing games and slept through the mornings and afternoons in a slothful routine. Moreover, when our son cried at night and I couldn't sleep, my husband would coldly say, "Make him stop crying, it's too loud." I repeatedly appealed to him to help with the household chores and childcare. But he kept making excuses, saying, "Household chores and childcare are your roles. And I'll be working soon, so you'll be doing it alone anyway." I was too sleep-deprived to argue any further, and eventually, I gave up trying to get him to contribute. In the end, his paternity leave was in name only, and he did nothing to help. I even found myself thinking it would be easier without my husband around. After experiencing such a parental leave, I stopped having expectations from him. It is often said that the resentments after childbirth last a lifetime, and I truly believe that. From then on, I regarded my husband as non-existent, and worked hard to take care of our son and the household chores. Dealing with my young son was fun, but it was challenging as everything was new to us. There were nights when he would wake up and cry all night long, and evenings when no matter what I did, he wouldn't stop crying because he was in a bad mood. With a young child, such days are inevitable. I realized I had to be flexible, so on those days, I would sleep when my son napped or switch dinner to ready-made meals to adapt to the situation. However, one day, my husband sharply noticed and criticized me. "Is the house not dirty today? Did you do the cleaning properly? The dinner is lacking in dishes. And the main dish, the croquette, is just a store-bought side dish. Don't cut corners." No matter how much I explained that it was difficult to manage the household chores while taking care of our son, my husband would not listen, saying, "You're not working, so you must be free all day." I was fed up with my husband, who would not help with household or childcare tasks, yet always had something to say. Additionally, I noticed that the living expenses my husband provided began to decrease once our son started kindergarten. As our son grew, the costs for food and daily necessities increased. And there were also monthly miscellaneous fees for kindergarten to cover. Even when I brought this up to my husband, he insisted he was giving enough and blamed me for not managing our finances properly. claiming, "The reason it's not enough is that you're not saving properly." Looking down on me coldly, he snapped, "Don't ask for money when you're not even working." Being accused of not working, I felt powerless to respond. Reluctantly, I began to dip into my savings from before. I was married to cover the monthly shortfalls in our budget. As these days continued, my savings quickly dwindled, and feeling a sense of crisis, I decided to re-enter the workforce full-time as our son started elementary school. Despite my fears about re-employment after a break from the workforce, I was able to get a job as a tutor at a learning center using my background as a former teacher. I was grateful that they assigned me to work with elementary students, considering my situation with a young child. When I told my husband about my job, he seemed uninterested and merely cautioned, "You wanted to work, so don't burden me with it." I took this to imply that he still expected me to handle all the housework and childcare as before. If I had told him, "I'm working because the living expenses you provide aren't enough," he would undoubtedly have been outraged, and I couldn't predict what he might do next. Moreover, I knew from our life together that talking with him was a waste of time. While it was challenging to manage a full-time job and perfect household duties, my son was getting older and needed less attention, which made things somewhat manageable. Now that I was working full-time, I realized I wouldn't struggle even if I divorced my husband. In fact, I thought being free from the stress might be a relief. And the idea of divorce frequently crossed my mind. However, my son was attached to his father, who only participated in the fun parts of parenting, playing with him only when he felt like it. My son seemed to enjoy the physical play that only a strong man could provide, and he was always happy when his father played with him. The thought of taking his father away from him through divorce and causing him sadness was heartbreaking, so I couldn't bring myself to go through with it. Time passed, and my son became a high school student. By then, my husband not only stopped contributing to the household expenses, but he also began to stay out late for work or was frequently away from home on business trips. My son, who had been fond of his father during his elementary school years, began to express frustration during his teenage years, complaining, "Dad's not coming home again today?" If his father was home, he would just sleep all day, which seemed to annoy my son. Moreover, despite rarely being home, my husband would still make annoying comments about our son's grades, which caused my son to resent him. For me, since my husband was hardly ever home when I was awake, I could spend more time with my son alone, which made our life more comfortable than before. My son, perhaps seeing his father as a bad example, grew up to be a sincere and kind young man who would voluntarily help with household chores without being asked. After studying hard, my son was able to pass the entrance exams and was admitted to a well-known university that he could commute to from home. He spent 4 meaningful years in college and secured a job at a major company, eventually leaving home. On the night he left, although I felt lonely, I also felt a sense of accomplishment for having raised him well on my own. I decided it was time to live freely for myself. With that determination, I began to seriously consider divorcing my husband, which I had postponed until now. One day, while I was relaxing in my room on a holiday, I heard the front door open, and the sound of my husband's voice and several people entering the house. My husband had been away from home for a while, but it seemed he had brought someone with him. Wondering what was going on, I left my room to investigate and saw that my husband had led the guests into the living room. When I approached the living room, I saw a woman who appeared to be at least 10 years younger than us, with flashy dyed hair, and 3 children who looked to be between kindergarten and early elementary school age. Faced with guests I never expected, I froze in place. My husband calmly introduced the woman and shockingly announced, "I'm currently dating her." Why would he brazenly bring such a person into our home? As I stood there confused, my husband continued, waving a divorce paper at eye level. From today, we have decided to live in this house. You're in the way, so I'd like to divorce you, but I guess you can stay as a maid if you must. Stunned by my husband's selfish declaration, I was at a loss for words, and my husband and his mistress snickered. Is it really okay to say that? She has never defied me no matter how she was treated, they said, laughing together. My husband boasted to his mistress that I was like his slave. He thought I avoided arguing with him because I had given up expecting anything from him, and let him do as he pleased, assuming I was too scared to defy him. I had remained silent not to disrupt the peace for our son. And although I had many things I wanted to say, I held back for the sake of my son. I didn't want to expose him to our marital conflicts and make him sad. Seeing us argue would only destabilize his emotions, I believed. Yet, I felt a rising anger towards my husband, who misunderstood me. Unaware of my indignation, my husband further boasted to his mistress that even when he stopped coming home, I quietly awaited his return like a faithful wife, amusingly claiming he was the master of the house. The mistress laughed crudely in response. Sitting beside them on a couch, the children, seemingly indifferent to the adults' confrontation, were engrossed in their handheld gaming devices. While watching the three children, I asked my husband, "Whose children are these?" He replied as if it were obvious, stating they were his and his mistress's children. According to my husband, he began his affair with the mistress around the time our son entered high school. To learn that he had fathered 3 children and built a family elsewhere was shocking. Given the children's ages, it seems they were born soon after the affair began. Was that why he stopped providing financial support for our home? On top of receiving no financial support from my husband, the money he had provided before was insufficient. So I covered all our son's high school and college expenses with my earnings. My husband must surely note that our son has gone on to university, but he has never brought up the subject of tuition fees. While I was desperately raising our son, it infuriated me to think that my husband was obsessed with his mistress and their children elsewhere. Even my son was neglected. My husband casually put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Well then, I guess you'll be our maid from now on." The mistress smirked and said, "Sorry about this," as she looked at me with a grin. Facing them directly, I spoke in a clear tone. "No, I will divorce and leave this house, so please feel free to do as you like with it." My husband, who had thought I depended on him, was visibly stunned by my straightforward agreement to the divorce. I told them I would pack my belongings and leave the house today, then quickly returned to my room. Since I had been gradually reducing my belongings in preparation for divorce, packing was quick. I packed only the essentials I would need immediately into a suitcase, organized the rest of my belongings, and arranged for a moving company to pack and transport them later. After I finished preparing everything, I received the divorce papers without hesitation. I said, "I'll be submitting these now," and put them in my bag. It seemed he hadn't expected me to leave immediately, so he and his mistress were a bit bewildered as I quickly left the house. I then went straight to the city court, and the divorce was processed without issue. I lived in a hotel for about a week but soon rented an apartment and moved in. It wasn't large, but it was spacious enough for one person. I enjoyed my newfound freedom and single life, feeling elated to be free from my husband. About a month after the divorce was finalized, I was living peacefully when my ex-husband called. What could he want now? Although I didn't want to answer, I thought it might be something important and couldn't ignore it. Wondering if it was about our son or the house, I reluctantly answered the phone. The first thing I heard was my ex-husband's desperate scream, "Help me!" Regretting picking up the phone as I listened, he explained that the mistress's children were completely undisciplined. punching holes in the walls, scribbling all over them, and wreaking havoc in the house. Neither the mistress nor my ex-husband could manage household chores. So the house was in disarray, and he was begging me to come clean. I sighed, exasperated but not surprised. In fact, before the mistress and her children moved into our house, a friend of mine lived in the apartment they had inhabited. My friend found it odd to see my husband at her apartment complex often and decided to follow him. She discovered that he was frequently visiting the mistress's apartment and told me about it. This was when our son was in his 3rd year of high school. Meaning I knew about the mistress and her children before my husband brought them to our house. I had thought they couldn't possibly be his children. So I was furious when he admitted they were his. According to my friend, the mistress's children were well-known troublemakers in the neighborhood despite being in elementary school, with rumors of them being caught shoplifting and warned by the police more than once. The youngest child seemed to have learned the worst behaviors from his brothers, using foul language loudly and being violent. They had been kicked out of the previous apartment due to noise and misconduct. Even when the children were causing chaos, the mistress did nothing, leading to visits from Child Protective Services. My friend told me that complaints about the mistress and her children were already accumulating in the apartment, and it was only a matter of time before they would be evicted again. So, when my ex-husband brought the mistress home, I quickly realized they had been kicked out of the apartment. I informed my ex-husband of this and asked, "You knew this would happen, right?" My ex-husband, flustered, explained that since the apartment was rented under the mistress's name, he hadn't cared about the damage, and he usually went on dates with the mistress, never bothering about what the children were doing. Then, realizing I had known everything and kept silent, he angrily blamed me. "Why didn't you warn me?" His childish reasoning and the way he shifted the blame to me were utterly exasperating. Ignoring his complaints, I said, "I'll come over because I have some business there." Misunderstanding that I would return, my ex-husband happily ended the call. 3 days after that call, I visited the house with a lawyer. From the entrance, I could see windows patched with cardboard and torn lace curtains, giving a glimpse of the disordered interior. Surprised that the house had fallen into such disrepair in just 2 months, I pressed the intercom. My ex-husband opened the door immediately and stepped back in surprise upon seeing the male lawyer beside me. Misunderstanding him as my new partner, he approached me irritably. "Are you getting remarried?" The lawyer, stepping between us, calmly introduced himself and then informed my ex-husband and the mistress that he was here to demand compensation for adultery. Compensation. Surprised, my ex-husband raised his voice. Hearing this, the mistress hurriedly came out from the back of the house. The lawyer handed them documents detailing the amount and nature of the compensation. They snatched the documents and frantically checked the contents, their eyes widening at the amount. After settling into my new apartment, I had decided to claim compensation from my ex-husband and his mistress and consulted a lawyer. Discussing the affair's duration, the existence of children between them, and my ex-husband's neglect of his family, it was clear that a substantial claim for compensation was possible. Considering the mental anguish since our son's birth, I felt entitled to a significant amount of compensation, and told the lawyer to obtain as much as possible. Shocked by the high amount, they were speechless. But my ex-husband pleaded for a reduction, citing the need for money for house repairs. The house was originally bought on a mortgage as a second-hand property. I had been paying the mortgage since my husband stopped contributing to our expenses, and there was still a balance due. Additionally, given its age, the house would soon need renovations, which would be costly. With that in mind, I easily handed over the house to my ex-husband and the mistress. The condition of the house, further damaged by the children's rampages, meant that repair costs would likely be substantial. When my ex-husband and his mistress begged for a reduction in the amount they owed, I calmly told them, "If you two can't pay, I plan to contact your parents and have them handle it. Similarly, if you do not agree to the payment of the compensation, I will also contact each of your parents." Hearing this, the two fell silent in despair. The lawyer then urged my ex-husband and his mistress to properly sign the compensation documents, thus securing the payment. Leaving the two with their heads in their hands, we left the house. Eventually, the mistress, who had always been wasteful, couldn't come up with the compensation, and as promised, the lawyer contacted her parents. Her parents, who are quite strict, were furious upon learning that their long-lost daughter had committed adultery and had children with her partner. They went to the house where my ex-husband and the mistress were living, lectured them, and forcibly took the mistress back to their home. Now, under her parents' supervision, the mistress is working tirelessly every day to repay the compensation her parents temporarily covered for her. The children, too, were taken back to their parents' home, where, after being neglected by the mistress, they are now receiving strict discipline from their grandparents. Though it's tough on the children now, rehabilitating them at this stage will likely benefit their future. Meanwhile, the ex-husband remains alone in the dilapidated house. He managed to pay the compensation, but couldn't afford the home repairs. The windows remain broken, and recently, the ceiling even started leaking. He can't sell the house as its value is nearly nil due to its poor condition. And even if he sold the land, it wouldn't cover the remaining mortgage. Desperate, my ex-husband contacted our son to explain his current plight and begged him to reconcile with us. However, having seen my struggles up close, our son, who now despises him, coldly dismissed him, never contact me again. Shocked by the separation from his mistress and being disowned by both me and his son, my ex-husband is apparently bedridden. Having successfully obtained the compensation, I decided to use this opportunity to buy a condo. I purchased a new condo in a convenient location near the station, which I can leave to my son if anything happens to me, and later. It could also serve as a rental property to generate income. After moving, my son often visits, and we enjoy meals together, just the two of us. He is doing well at his new job and finds it very fulfilling. As for me, my job as a tutor at a tutoring center is going well. And I've been approached about a promotion to director in the next personnel change, which looks promising. Being officially separated from my ex-husband feels like being freed from the shackles that had been holding me back. Now, I'm relishing my freedom and savoring happiness every day.